This is Marian Triano. I'm here today with Dr. Randolph Shipon. Thank you, Dr. Shipon, for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
Dr. Shipon is a PhD psychologist practicing in New Jersey. He is also the author of Reiki Psychology. You were saying that you've now moved into something called emotional freedom technique.
EFT.
Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, well, I have a funny story to tell you. It was about 7 years ago. My wife and I went to a meeting where some of these very creative types had gotten together, an organization in Morristown, and they had a training on this thing called tapping, the emotional freedom technique. And it was kind of funny to look around the room at the people who, had brought problems into the room, and we were supposed to tap on our problems, tapping here and here and here and here and here, and on the collarbone, under the arm, and parts of the hand. And by the time you got through this technique, you felt better about whatever the problem was. And my wife and I walked out of there knowing we had a very nice time, but kind of dismissing it as, well, that was so interesting to see a room full of people doing this silly thing with the tapping, that we didn't give it a lot of credence for actually having helped us with whatever the problems were. We just thought, well, we were laughing. Laughing is good, right? Like we had a good time. And lately, tapping is getting a lot of attention in the clinical literature because they're finding that it's working very well, comparably well, and in some cases much faster than some of the other techniques that are used for people who have gone through significant trauma. And so, those techniques, typically when you hear about techniques that work for people with trauma, you hear about like EMDR or somatic experiencing. There's another one that I'm trained in called eye movement integration therapy. Similar idea. The idea is that the more ancient parts of the brain, the parts that are dealing with the stress hormones, they need to be realigned while there's an exposure going on to the actual feared stimulus. And this tapping technique works remarkably well with people who have been through wartime trauma, the various PTSDs from wartime, people who've witnessed genocide. And it's working very well with people who go through much less severe, what we call developmental traumas. People who've never been able to get over a certain problem, feel embarrassed speaking in public, and so this literature was published in 2012 in one of the American Psychological Association journals, and I'm so happy to see that this technique, which works so quickly, is making it into mainstream psychological publications that I've started using it now with my own clients. And between that and Reiki, I feel like it's a nice little tool set to have to offer people. And the nice thing about all of these things is that they're fairly easy to learn. Of the three, hypnosis, you really need the most training in. But Reiki and tapping, I really feel like anybody can pick up those things and start using them right away.
So if you're taking a look at the tapping, what is the mechanism? Does anyone understand at this point? Have the clinical trials talked about what the mechanism is by which it actually makes some of these changes?
We're starting to get some clues. We believe that the tapping of acupressure points is actually deactivating the cortisol, and that there's about a 20% drop in cortisol levels when people tap on these points. So what you're doing is you're essentially doing, for any anxiety-based condition, the recommended treatment emerging out of cognitive behavioral therapy and then moving on through various other therapies is called ERP, exposure and response prevention. So what you're doing is you're essentially telling a person, go into the feared situation or have the feared thought, have that thought, but have a competing state from your natural state of high level of fear and activation, and stay in that very threatening situation or with that very threatening thought until you can tolerate it.
Okay.
So when you're doing tapping, what you're doing is I'm getting them to experience the feared thought, and then there's a script. With tapping, the script goes, even though I blank, so even though I get really nervous speaking before groups, I deeply and completely accept myself. And you have them take a measurement of first of what that fear speaking before groups is, 0 to 10, 10 being the word. It's called subjective units of distress. And then you have them go through tapping, just saying a few words that key into that fear. So fear of speaking before groups, etc. By the time they finish, their subjective units of distress goes way down, and we think it might be because the cortisol is dropping by 20%. So that's breaking the physiological association between the feared stimulus, the thought, and the actual biochemical reaction. And by breaking that, it appears that it's fairly permanent, that people don't relapse after that, that once you break it once, it's pretty well broken. And if it doesn't stay pretty well broken, what you're supposed to do is go through it using different aspects of the same feared stimulus. So it's really a very useful tool, and I use it with very many people I work with.
It's really interesting. Now, does it matter where you tap? I mean, would it be, fine to tap someplace different than the path that has been suggested?
I don't, just because when I learn something that works, I like to stick with it. But it appears to be, in these videos, the best videos I think are the originals by Gary Craig, where he's been teaching EFT to the world for more than 25 years. It's only recently that they came up with a certification in 2011, but people have been using this for a very long time. The points are widely available on the internet, but in general, there's an affirmation that's either done here by finding a sore spot here and saying, even though I blank, I deeply and completely accept myself, or it's done tapping on the karate chop point of the hand. Even though I have a fear of speaking before groups, I deeply and completely accept myself. And then it goes through a process. It's the eyebrow, side of the eye, under the nose, under the lip, and then it's collarbone, side right here. And then you tap on the side of the thumb, side of the first finger, side of the second finger, you skip to the fourth finger, and then here. And that's it. There's another procedure in the middle called the 9-gamut procedure, but it's all so easy to learn, and it's all widely available on YouTube.
So when you're working with personally and in your professional practice with things like Reiki and EFT, are you actually teaching it to your clients, or how has it impacted the way that you in fact practice psychology?
Oh gosh. That's a great question. Most of the time when people come to see me, we do a full assessment of what's going on. I need to come up very often with a diagnosis. I have to come up with a diagnosis just to have nomenclature for talking about it with their doctors or with their insurance companies, etc. And then most of what I'm doing is a mix of cognitive behavioral techniques, which is what I'm trained in, humanistic techniques. And then I'm going to introduce these other techniques for getting over specific emotional patterns. So a book that I'm working on and training that I'm hoping to be given after I write the book is going to be talking about that the real work of psychotherapy is pattern interruption and then repatterning. If you think about what we're doing, is what we're taking a person's patterns that have worked for them for a long time, maybe worked very, very well for them in previous phases of their lives, but something about these patterns has become problematic. And so what you're doing is you're using a series of techniques, whether it's through talk therapy or through hypnosis or Reiki or EFT or whatever you're using, you're trying to introduce something that is going to be a significant interruption to their normal way of performing a pattern that is no longer working out for them. And then once you break that pattern, you have to install something else. And so, that's where we talk about what might be alternatives. What are your options? In neurolinguistic programming, we say whoever has the most options wins. So, you want to have all kinds of different approaches to solving problems rather than the ones that you used to rely on that probably don't work well anymore. And so Reiki, EFT, hypnosis, these are all pattern interruptions, and you can use them in some ways to install new patterns, and then those new patterns will be the way that the person not only copes with the problems that they have, but also chooses new behaviors that are going to get them more of what they really want.
So when's your new book coming out?
Well, I have 8 chapters. I just finished chapter 1, so I assume that it will come out before, with any luck, before next April. So.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
If people want to get a hold of you, if they want more information and perhaps even want an appointment to see you, how would they get a hold of you?
My website, they can go to www.inner-wealth, and it's WELLTH.com. That's one way. Another way is in New Jersey. My practice is in Morris County, so they can go to morriscountypsychology.com and find me there. And just Google my name. If they Google me, they'll see my contact info. So,
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Shipon, I want to thank you for taking the time and being here today to speak with me and to speak with everyone. Really appreciate it. It's Marian Triano from stressban.com and Dr. Randolph Shipon. Hopefully we'll have a chance to chat again once your book comes out.
I'd love that. And thank you so much. I really appreciate the time that you took with me.